Thank you. Hey, I'm the co-host of the show, The Way Forward. We are here. It's a Saturday morning, and so if you're here with us, go ahead and dig in for about an hour or so. We're going to talk about race, politics, and religion, all the things that people don't talk about these days. Justin, he's somewhere up on the screen here. So if you see a half-naked teenage boy walking around here, make sure you have a shirt on, son. He's traveling with me this week. We are broadcasting live from. It's actually now sunny in Sallisaw, Arkansas. So if you're in Sallisaw, Arkansas this morning, I don't even know really where we're at. We had a concert last night in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. Wonderful, folks. To all the Tahlequinians that are out there, I just want to say just big up to you guys. It was a wonderful experience out there. It was rather remote, but there was a lot of people. So, hey, the Lord was glorified. Concert was played. Gospel was preached. Boy going through the background, but he's been a great traveling companion with me this time. And so we're broadcasting from another hotel somewhere in the United States. And we got to get Jason on here in just a few moments. And we're going to talk, get us warmed up with a little bit of Star Wars, Star Trek action here, laugh a little bit before we start crying a little bit, because today we're going to continue our discussion with the interviews, and you are not going to want to miss this. And so if you got people around you and you're like, hey, you got to hear this discussion today, we're bringing in Pastor Kimbrough. And we're going to talk through the questions that we've been asking these pastors that we've been interviewing, and then see where this conversation goes. And so without further ado, Jason is at the doorbell, so let's let him in. Welcome, sir.
Morning.
How art thou?
Doing well. I'm doing well. Saturday in Litchfield, so crazy as all get out. Busy. Actually, somewhat sunny this morning. It's supposed to rain later, but it's like a high of 52 today.
Woo!
Yeah, it's like we can't let go of winter. We just cannot let go of winter. So I don't know what the deal is. It was 80 something last week, but it's we're a little bipolar in Illinois. We're a little bipolar.
Mm-hmm.
We can't make up our mind it's going to be a happy sunny day or a cold, brisk fall.
Well, hey,
day.
I think we got a little bit of that last night as well. It was low 60s last night, which is a little too uncomfortable for me. I was at the outdoor festival and concert there, so
I see you got the jacket on. With the hood.
I got to put the jacket on. I got to put the hood on. Oh, man.
Right.
What's going on in this thing?
Yeah.
And so really good experience there. Really great to have you on the show again today, because, we're better together.
That's right.
As the ratings do show us, there's more people who watch when it's you and I than people who watch when it's just me.
It's one of us.
So I don't know what that means. The Erskine Music Show. People just like, When it's Jason and Erskine, they're like, okay, tune in. Maybe you add a perspective that people are looking for on this show.
I'm the ivory to your ebony.
Yeah.
Salt to your pepper.
So people needing that in their lives these days.
Right.
So I wanted to talk just very briefly. We jump into some of the topics here. And I should go ahead and say the comment section is turned on. Let me say that comment section is turned on this morning. So stay classy out there, wherever you're broadcasting from or wherever you're commenting from. We had some folks that were joining us from Zimbabwe last week on the Erskine Music Show. And so I know there's an international audience that pays attention to this. John Conrad from Scraper, Oklahoma. Yes, I enjoyed having you last night. And so glad that you took me up on the offer to watch the show. So we'll be jumping into some topics here that I think you guys will be interested in just a few moments. But this last week, we had, it was May the 4th. And I don't know what you guys do with May the 4th and May the 4th be with you, but that's kind of a big thing for Star Wars folks. And there's a lot that comes out from that. And our family engaged in that. You can't call it a holiday.
It's not a holiday.
It's not a holiday. But it's kind of a cultural
cult-ish thing.
Cult-ish thing that we do. And actually, I've kind of been, I'm kind of one of those people. Maybe I'm a young old man or an old young man. I don't know how you want to say it, but stuff like that. It just, if everybody seems to be doing it, I don't really jump on those bandwagons like that too fast. But this year, I actually got on the bandwagon, and I'll tell you why in just a few moments.
it's one of those things where I got a weird taste in my mouth. I worked with a guy who was really into Star Wars, and he was so into it that he wanted to dress up as a stormtrooper for his wedding. So he was getting like a stormtrooper outfit, and that's what him and his wife were gonna get married in. And I thought that was over the top, and then I found out there was more people like him. Like there were people who thought that was a really good idea.
Bro, Comic-Con is a thing, bro. So I'm just gonna let you know. There's more people. There might be more people that are engaged in Comic-Con than go to church in America. It's crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a whole lifestyle. That's a affinity group of which I never knew that there was such participation. Avid participation.
There's a beef between Star Trek people and Star Wars people.
Which is funny. That's one of the things I was going to bring up because a lot of people on May the 4th, they'll put all their Star Trek stuff up and they will just try to pick at the Star Wars people just a little bit, just a little bit of a dig there. Oh, we got Lil Eazy-E coming in this morning.
Yeah.
Good morning, Elias.
The namesake. He's got
Lil Erskine over there.
Yeah. So he's joining us this morning with his lightsaber-ish thing. This is about as Star Wars we get right here.
Yeah.
Because it's a sword, right? And boys like to play with swords. So
if you want to be controversial, we can talk about Star Trek in reference to May the 4th, and that ticked everybody off. We're losing viewership, but all the agitated people out there that are Star Trek fans are they're appreciating this little jag that we have now.
Yeah, there's a beef that I didn't realize. Old space versus new space, and the way things are done. I mean, it's a thing. Like you would almost think it's the Calvinist Arminian argument or something. It's crazy. I didn't even mean to get into the middle of it. I just said, hey, I like to watch Star Trek. I mean, I like the holodeck and the traveling through space and the,
it's the sharks and the jets, man.
It's crazy.
What are the two, the Montagues and the Capulets?
Yeah.
We got Shakespearean battle up in this thing.
Yeah. We
create controversy already, and it's Star Wars, May the 4th.
Yeah. May the 4th.
But the reason why I wanted to start with that really this morning is because of the evangelistic nature of what can happen with, some of those things, curious cultural commentaries like that. We had someone who gave us a cookie cutter, and it was a Star Wars cookie cutter. And we decided this year that we would make Star Wars cookies with the cookie cutter, and that we would distribute those to our neighbors, and that was a good inroad, kind of a curious little thing, very non-offensive, very non-threatening way to engage our neighbors and to continue some of the cultural dialogue that we have with them, just because it's May the 4th. And, I think next year we're probably going to try to dress up maybe and add a little bit more to it and take some pictures and kind of just make it a thing that our family does. No judgment or anything on anybody else, but we're not big Halloween people. We don't dress up and do that sort of thing. But
you're gonna
May the 4th and having some evangelistic stuff going on there, I think I can see us doing that. I can see, who was Childish Gambino? What was his character? Oh, you don't really watch it, but anyway, I can see myself, being that character next year and trying to come out of the woodworks.
Hey, it doesn't surprise me at all to hear you say that. I just want to hear Justin's thoughts on that. Because I'd love to hear.
I think if he can be a stormtrooper, he might be okay with it.
A stormtrooper where he can hide his face.
Oh, he's shaking his head. He's saying no. What are we doing here?
No.
You want to be the black stormtroopers, the death troopers. Oh, he wants to be a shore trooper, whatever that is.
Okay.
So yeah,
That's
so
hilarious.
we have got some cool stuff here today. We cannot figure out how to turn this thing off. The air came on all of a sudden. It is like humming in the background here. Can you hear it? Is that messing up the audio?
I don't hear anything.
Okay. Well, I'll just deal with it over here on my end. But because of the nature of that, some of the lower interviews that we had with our Pastor Aaron, those, the audio is not bumped up on those, but I wanted to play some of the things from Pastor Kimbrough this morning and really get into continued robust discussion of how we move forward, because all of this is going to be one, analyzing and understanding the context that we find ourselves in, the perspectives that are at play here, but then also allowing us the opportunity, and I would dare say even the privilege of being able to see a way for us to move forward. And so we'll do that here in just a few moments. Again, the comment section is turned on for those that are watching. We appreciate your comments, and I'll try to do a good job of watching your comments and plugging you guys into the show. Remember, there is a 10-second delay, and so we'll say something and maybe move on to a topic. I'll get back around to it, and then we'll kind of chop it up like that. Yeah. So without further ado, let's race forward in our show and get to some pretty important stuff here that I wanted to say. Jason, let me pause and let you give any an insertion before. In fact, could you do the 5 questions again?
Yeah. So just as kind of a reminder, we, Erskine and I, were able to sit down with a few pastors and we're able to talk about Martin Luther King's letter from the Birmingham jail in 1963, I believe it was, and from that letter, we kind of put together 5 comments, 5 questions that we were kind of putting out to these pastors, dealing with the church and race in particular. And some of the observations that Martin Luther King made in jail, we kind of wondered, are they relevant today still? And one of the things we started with was this idea that well-intended white evangelicals gloss over the problem. I think we covered that quite a bit last week. We asked that question. Do you see that? Do you think that Caucasian pastors, white pastors, are glossing over the issue of race? And they answered that respectively. We asked the pastors to comment on the idea that racism is a moral issue that makes it a gospel issue. Therefore, we have a responsibility to openly address it. Do you agree with that? And how do we assess? How do we move forward if it's a moral issue and a gospel issue together as a church? Another question we posed: those in the majority class, race privilege, have a difficult time appreciating the depth of the struggle that is experienced by minority groups. What are your thoughts on that? And understanding that racial reconciliation is costly because justice is costly. And so we asked them to comment on that comment and what were their thoughts. And then finally, to move forward, it needs a clear, persistent voice of white evangelical pastors that is loud enough to be heard if restoration reconciliation is going to happen. And we asked the pastors, do you agree with that statement? And what would that voice look like? And how would it be heard in the Black community? How would it be appreciated? And so those are some of the ideas and questions that we put out there along those lines. And we gave the pastors a lot of freedom to kind of move around those areas. So we didn't stick directly to the fences, so to speak. We just allowed them to kind of wander around and discuss what they're seeing and how they're experiencing these issues and their context. And so Pastor Aaron was in St. Louis, African-American pastor, a Lutheran pastor, and a principal at a primarily all-Black school in East St. Louis. And then Pastor Kimbrough is a Lutheran pastor up in Wisconsin. And then we hope to have more pastors as well. But right now it's 2 African-American voices speaking into it. So that's kind of been our context of the conversation so far.
Yeah. So wanted to queue up a few of those interviews, and I will say I wanted to kind of take this first part of the conversation because I know there's a lot of people who think, man, it feels like heavy weighted on white pastors' responsibility, white guilt, kind of white fragility, kind of the perspective. And we're not bringing that at all. In fact, both Pastor Aaron and Pastor Kimbrough were animated, maybe I could say, about the fact that there were many white pastors who were engaging this issue. Obviously, there are some who don't, but there are many who have engaged the issue and are offering some very helpful solutions, beneficial partnerships, offering a way forward that I think is instructive for the church. And so both of them articulated that. I don't want you to feel like from any part of the conversation, because we're having to chop it up, that perspective has not been offered and was not at least sensed and articulated by the pastors that we spoke to. And I wanted to begin. Go ahead.
I don't mean to cut you off, but also keep in mind, this is just one part of the conversation. There's going to be other conversations where you have to deal with, say, the topic of individual responsibility. At some point, we're going to need to address individual responsibility, and that's a pretty easy argument to make. And I think that's the primary argument you hear a lot is, hey, listen, these communities have responsibility to themselves, and these people are making decisions, and they need to be held accountable for decisions. And that's a great discussion to have, and we need to have that discussion. But we wanted to have a discussion first that often doesn't get addressed first, and that's this discussion of what is the white community doing, how's the white church affecting things, what's the relationship between the black church and the white church, and how we can make it better. So I just thought last week I didn't really make that as clear as I could have, because I think somebody was bringing it up. And so even though we let the pastors kind of roam in the field a little bit, we do have these boundaries right now inside of this context of this question. So if it feels like, man, you guys are just kind of hammering on one side, well, that's because we're talking about this section first. Think of it like a filing cabinet that we kind of pulled out, and we're looking at this particular part first. And there'll be opportunities to have more discussions about other aspects that are important to the conversation, but they're just not necessarily being addressed primarily right now. Does that make sense, Erskine?
Yep, absolutely. I want to make sure that we said that, because I'm going to actually begin with the most controversial, what he describes as the most controversial statement that he makes, because it centers on that part of personal responsibility in the black community. And I wanted people to hear that and understand that we were engaging that part of the conversation as well, and what it is that we're doing, so they don't think, I don't even care what you think. I just know we're doing what the Lord wants us to do. That's it. But I wanted to address this subject because I feel like people needed to hear someone who's articulate, who's a black pastor, speak to the issues related to the African-American community, as well as some ways that we need to kind of see perspective and understand that in the majority culture as well. So here we go. This is Pastor Kimbrough, and this is his assessment on both sides of that issue to get us started.
If I understood the question correctly, what are the costs? I think the word that comes to mind, Erskine, is a healthy dose of honesty. That's on the part of the majority as well as the minority culture. We're all going through something, okay? Majority culture are going through, a feeling of guilt, unwanted guilt. I didn't, like you articulate, I didn't do this. I didn't cause this. I'm sorry that the forefathers did this, but can we just get on? I think honesty, in the sense that there is privilege that has come about as a result of the racism of the past, and just acknowledging that. But there's another thing too, and this might be controversial, Erskine, but I'm going to say it because I really feel strongly about this. There has to be honesty on the part of minorities as well, okay? Because a lot of the African Americans and Latino Americans that I deal with, I guess we've become accustomed to the trauma that has become a part of our lives. And as a result of becoming accustomed to that trauma, we've believed the lie of racism, that we are less than. We deal with it here in our school, in our elementary school. trying to raise the ceiling of a lot of these students when they're conditioned from young on that I can only accomplish and I can only get so far. But there has to be honesty in recognizing, hey, racism has affected me to the point where it has dictated how far I can go in this world, what I can accomplish. So a part of the problem is that minorities have believed the lie of racism. You don't need the KKK anymore or anybody like that because it's ingrained in the membrane. And so I think honesty is something that has to take place on both sides, like sitting down in a counselor's office on their couch and saying, this is me. This is where I'm at now, and this is the reason why. And this is what not, other people need to change. This is what I personally need to change in my heart if there is going to be a change in my life. I can't just wait on other people to change. I've got to change my self-concept, and I got to do it by getting into the Word of God and letting God's Word redefine my identity. Not based upon my color or my circumstances, but upon the cross of my Savior, Jesus Christ.
Yeah. So he just went there, which is kind of dovetailing the conversation that we were having. Rick James says that he's grateful that we're having these discussions. And if you go back and you see the Thursday edition of the Erskine Music Show, he was a great guest on that show, and we look to have him back, friend of the show and a friend of this show as well. So, yeah, let's dive into that honesty part of the conversation.
That has been a message that I have as a pastor been preaching for the better part of my ministry. Is guard your heart, watch your heart, transform your heart, deal with yourself, The Bible says that the heart is the wellspring of life. Therefore, you need to watch it, and you need to understand that where your identity lies, and who's the greatest voice speaking to you. If I sit down in counseling, one of the biggest things I have to try to do is fight against all the voices that are speaking into this person's life, and try to get them to understand the most important voice is God's voice through His Word. And the way forward, the way I heard Pastor Kimball say it, one of the way forward is it's on both sides of that spectrum. Either it's the majority privilege or the minorities have to hear God's voice on the matter. And that is not being spoken enough in our culture, if at all. And that's where the church comes in. I mean, that's where the church is supposed to be the place where mercy and grace and justice all converge into one spot at the cross, and the church provides the space for us to have that conversation, to speak identities. And I think that's just, to hear him say that I could, yeah.
That was, I thought I would start with that because that was so well articulated and so well stated. And it comes from the backdrop of, again, another person who is in an inner city context where there's a lot of crime, where there's a lot of poverty, where there's a lot of stereotypes that would be placed upon people in that scenario and students in that scenario, being able to say, okay, let's come to the table honestly and figure out what really is the boogeyman here. Because I know there's a lot of majority culture people who come and they speak to me and it's like, really? Are we always talking about racism? Racism can't be that bad in America. I don't know anybody who's a racist. I'm not a racist. And so therefore racism is not a big deal. The media is making racism a big deal. And so there's that narrative that's out there coinciding with this other narrative that's out there. It's like, even if there wasn't the KKK and slave patrols driving up and down the streets in Milwaukee, if you've conditioned your mind to think everybody's a racist, everybody's against me, I'm going to fail, then that ultimately becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that needs to be dealt with. And so I'm so glad that he went there. And I wanted to let you guys know who are watching this show, we're willing to go there as well, because it's a conversation that needs to take place. Truth and honesty. And we got some folks who are tuning in today. Roy, thank you so much for joining us from Kansas City, the Kansas City area. Looking forward. Every day gets closer to Nehemiah Fest and me driving that Corvette again. All right. John Conrad makes this comment: in the two churches that I belong to has never brought up racial issues. Both churches have Native Americans in them, and we have African Americans come and visit. Racimize or maybe even with race issues, has never come up. That does not surprise me.
No. Any pastor who's thinking about a career, the pastorate as a career, there's some no-nos that you just kind of avoid. And that's why you can't look at the pastorate as a career. You got to be willing to lose your job every Sunday if you're going to uphold the truth and confront sin. That's the two areas that get you fired.
Yeah, let's talk honestly. Go there for just a second. There's some people who need to hear that. Yeah. There's some pastors who are going to listen to this perhaps a little bit later who need to hear that statement. And then there's some folks who are looking at their church and the fact that, my church has never had a conversation. And again, I'm in Oklahoma, or was last night in Tahlequah. Heavy Native American presence there last night. And I love the diversity that was there. And you can have, there's just a lot. So go there for just a second, my brother.
Yeah. Well, I tell myself a lot as a pastor that I'm going to die on a few hills. I'm not going to make many hills the hill I die on. I'm going to compromise as much as I can where I can, but I'm not going to die. I'm not going to compromise the truth. And I'm going to be willing to confront sin in my own life and the life of my people and the life of my community. Because sin brings death, and only truth can fix it. And so I need to be willing to lose my job over these issues. And I'm convinced that this racial reconciliation is a place to stand the ground on. And Pastor Aaron convinced me of it moreover when we had a discussion with him. And he said to me, if we both agree that something is wrong and we see something is wrong, but you're not willing to come help me deal with it or confront it, and what's going on there? And so I looked at that, and I looked at him, and I looked at some of the things we're talking about, and I just reaffirmed myself. This is an issue that needs to be addressed. This is an issue the church has the answer to, and if nobody's going to stand up and talk about it and be willing to lose their job over it, then the church is doomed. But I believe the gospel of Jesus Christ is more powerful than that and stronger than that, and God will provide my mortgage payment and my food like He always has, regardless if He's paying my salary. So
that's awesome. Psalm 37. Yeah.
And more importantly, my relationship to you is extremely important. And when I look into Justin's eyes and I see that young man, I want to be able to be honest with him and tell him I did everything I could to bring you to Jesus Christ. Everything I could.
Hey, Justin, get your face up in this thing so he can look in your eyes.
Yeah, I did everything I could.
In this thing.
I didn't want to be a stumbling
block. Look at that face.
Yeah, I did everything I could to bring you to a saving relationship with Jesus Christ. I wasn't a stumbling block. I didn't create that place where you can look at it and say, "See that guy? You see that guy? He wouldn't speak to this, or he wouldn't uphold me as a person. He wouldn't value me as made in the image of God, because he would never deal with these issues that are at hand. And that's not something I can live with."
Good. Now go represent that Steph Curry gear.
Yeah, Steph Curry. That's right.
We got some folks who are tuning in from last night. Robbie Pruitt. We would have gone to lunch today, but I'm doing the show today. But we'll get it next time. So thank you so much for tuning into the show today. Yeah, I think it's a great discussion to have. I think one of the things that kind of perpetuates sort of an angst in this discussion on both sides is that I think, and Pastor Kimbrough articulated this in the early part of the interviews, there are some people who just want this conversation to go away. Yeah. It is uncomfortable. You've highlighted the fact that there's some pastoral no-nos that are out there. If you're a majority culture pastor out there and this subject comes up again, are we doing this thing again? Okay, I've got to, kind of like the Exxon Valdez spill. I don't know if you know, there's some executives that were interviewed after the Exxon Valdez spill. They were caught on camera basically saying, I don't care what you do, just do something so it makes it look like we care about it. And I feel like that's the response of a lot of majority culture pastors when another flare up happens, and when somebody's killed or there's rioting out in the streets, is to just say, okay, let's make it look like we care about this for just a second. So let's, call some black people and, offer some condolences, or just get them to come to a fellowship dinner, or like we'll sing some songs together or something. And then we'll go back to normal. The distrust that a lot of African-American pastors have, and even engage in the conversation. I don't know how many majority culture pastors have told me, I've tried to reach out to pastors and they won't take my call. I've tried to, and they won't respond to me. Well, that's because there's a culture of distrust that's created when our response is either, okay, I'll do something so it makes it look like I care about this, but I don't really. Or the response is, I'm just going to deny critical race theory, all these other things, and never get to the heart of the issue. There's lives that are actually affected. There's kids that need to be discipled. There's families that need to be encouraged. There's communities that are in peril, and you could do something about it. But instead, you're going to focus all your time, attention, and energy on critical race theory and the boogeyman, and these schools are teaching, and this. And it's just like, when are we ever going to deal with the actual issue of actual people? That creates distrust. And again, this sense of animosity between even good brothers in Christ.
Yeah. Well, that's again, it goes to our we asked the question, if racism is a moral issue, it's a gospel issue, right? So that begs the question, if we believe that, if we think that statement is true, which I believe it is true, racism is a moral issue, and it does make it a gospel issue. Are we being immoral by not wanting to address it? I mean, that's just one of those questions that kind of come up. Well, it's easier to blame critical race theory and all of its flaws and all of its problem than to actually go after the immorality of racism. Because I've got a target there. I've got a system of thought that is Marxist. I've got a system of thought that's atheistic. I got a system of thought that has that's got a lot of red flags when it comes to biblical thinking, and even what's even good for community. However, one of the things that you get when people start discussing critical race theory is that there is a racial problem. And people are looking for ways to address it, understand it. And critical race theory is a system of thought that helps some people put pieces together, even if they're not entirely right. Well, the Bible comes along and tells you, look, we have an understanding about racism that goes beyond critical race theory, but we refuse as Christians to actually address it. Therefore, the world will address it through critical race theory. And so you can't get mad at critical race theory and people who are buying into it when you refuse to apply the Bible to addressing the issue at hand. And so I'm not a big proponent or fan of it. But one of the things that critical race theory reminds me is that there is a racial problem. It's racism, and morality, Bible says, is viewing the world through God's moral lens, and racism doesn't do that, and the gospel does. And so, how are we supposed to now, if racism is a moral issue, which makes it a gospel issue, the question then comes: how does the gospel address racism, critical race theory, and all that? Well, I'm not hearing a lot of folks think of it that way. It's always, as soon as you say that you have some component of critical race theory, you shut down. I'm not talking to you. I'm not even going to engage the conversation. You're an enemy instead of having the conversation. And that's just what I'm viewing. And that's the optics of what I'm seeing. And maybe it's on both sides, but it's creating a lot of division, and it's not just the critical race theory people who are creating division. It's also people on the other side, the Christians, who are not willing to engage the conversation and accept the reality that, hey, critical race theory exposes some flaws, some real problems in our communities.
Yeah. And, I and I think you do as well. We've talked about it over the years. I mean, we both love Vodi Bakum and folks that are sort of in that camp, our Reformed friends who have been foundational in a lot of what it is that we have grown up understanding and what we have taught. And yet there are times when I listen to their perspective and I think you've missed something. You're great teachers. And I know that in a conversation, it's important to have a dialogue back and forth. But from the teaching vantage point, teaching about what is wrong with critical race theory offers a lot of people the opportunity to say, look, here's what the problem is. Somebody taught me what the issue is. And so now they go out into the world, kind of like the disciples that you're creating. They go out into the world having the answers. And the answer is to shut anybody down who supposedly has any type of affiliation with, like they would identify what you just said because you didn't completely denounce critical race theory as being completely abhorrent to any type of Christianity or biblical faith or in conjunction with any type of biblical faith. They would hear what you just said right there and they would say, look, you endorse critical race theory, so therefore you're done. And that's not the way that you have a dialogue. And so you have identified something that I think is important, Jason. The world has identified a problem that the church should already be addressing and should already have communities that are flourishing as a result of the antidote to what the world is saying. And yet I see people who, they get characterized as these woke people out, these woke millennials who are beginning to make these changes in society, and people get upset with them. Well, where's this upsetness at the church and the fact that we've not done the first thing that God calls us to do, love God, love people. And so I want to fly in some more from Pastor Kimbrough. I mean, the comment section is also turned on. So let's fly on this one as well. Here we go.
In my estimation, it's about the trauma. Okay. When people have come through a trauma, as I stated earlier, unless you have experienced a similar trauma, you can't begin to understand the anger, sometimes the rage, sometimes the paranoia, let's use that word too, that every little thing, for the majority race, if they haven't experienced that, what are you getting so upset about? Why do you always go and play the race card? Why do you do that? Well, that's based upon decades and decades of trauma. And we constantly get that, Erskine, on the news. I mean, here in Milwaukee, you may not be familiar with this, but last year we had upwards of 200 gun violent crimes here in Milwaukee. All of those families and all of the people who know those people who die, they're affected in a very personal way by that trauma. And so if there's one thing that I can say in answer to your question, I think the majority culture has not gone through the trauma that a lot of Latino and Black Americans daily have to endure. And I think if you can just listen with your heart, if you're a part of the majority culture, then hopefully that's going to help you to at least sympathize, if not empathize, with what you see happening so often in our country. It's pent up trauma being released and having the opportunity to release it by marching and doing all of the things that we see going on today. It's a roundabout way to answer your question, but that would be my answer.
All right. Trauma.
I'm curious, how would you, so the first thing I would think of, if I was having this conversation, say with some of my white community members, would be that they would probably contend that trauma is self-inflicted, right? 200 murders are more than likely it's going to be black on black crime or minority crime. So how would you, the trauma is pent up trauma or self-inflicted, then how would you respond to that, Erskine, just out of curiosity?
Well, I think he actually responds to that question because it does come up. Yeah, I got to figure out which soundbite that's in, but he actually responds to that himself and just saying there's dual responsibilities here. You can't take somebody that's in trauma and say, well, this is the way you should respond, and this is what you should do, and this is the way, your community should operate, without actually dealing with the trauma. And so there's that part of that kind of sits there. But then he does look at, and I have to find that soundbite, the community responsibility to re-educate ourselves, to immerse ourselves in what it means to be productive and what it means to be forward thinking, and that there is some responsibility there. Some responsibility lies there. Yeah. It's not all on someone else. And I think he does a good job of balancing that out and simply saying that there are some issues that need to be dealt with there that, honestly speaking, a lot in the minority cultures don't do such a great job of articulating. And so
there are two things that come to my mind that he said that I thought was, it's got me thinking. I haven't thought through it a lot, but my gut response is to be like, okay, look, that trauma is self-inflicted. You're doing it to yourselves. I just, don't understand where you're coming from. That's my gut response, right?
Yeah.
But as I sit down and I think through it for a second, one of the things he asked me to do, because that's who he's talking to. He's talking to me. And he's saying, look, what I want you to do is I want you to understand that these communities suffer a lot of trauma, and it is some of it self-inflicted, but it's also a sense of hopelessness that's been there for a long time. And you can make an argument that hopelessness has been generational and been there, like he spoke earlier, because you received this message of who you are and what you're about. And what he asked me to do was he asked me to sympathize and empathize. Just because a community is in peril and that's self-inflicted doesn't mean I can't hurt for that community, or I should take the stance of, well, you did it to yourself, so you're just being idiots about it. No, that's not the gospel. The gospel says I should look at that and mourn and weep. Any community that's struggling. Two, yeah. I have to recognize that trauma is not just in my generation. That trauma has been there for a long time. And though I personally didn't have something to do with it as far as forcing somebody to feel this way, I have to recognize that communities as a whole suffer identity crises. And when you're told over and over again for the last 50, 60, 70, 80 years that you can only be one thing or one way, or that you're perceived as being this particular way, eventually you start to believe it, and there's going to be consequences to it. To not recognize that, I think, is derelict. Is be like, well, it's maybe narrow-sighted. You understand what I'm saying? It's like I'm approaching a community only through the lens of 44 years, how long I've been alive. But that's not how long the community's been alive. The community's been alive for a long time. And the community has dealt with many, many issues that have come down the line. And so I have to go back 100 years, 200 years even, and start looking at these communities and start saying, look, these are messages and these are things that have happened that have a consequence as a community as a whole. And I can't deny that those things weren't traumatic. I can't do that. Because history is littered with people groups have risen up out of anger because certain other groups have done crazy things to them. And so I look at his statement, and what he's asking me to do is, one, have a heart of sympathy and empathy. Recognize that when sin grabs a hold of a community, it kills people. And yeah, there's a lot of problems there. Two, also recognize that this trauma is not just in this generation. This trauma is longer term. So just have an idea of what we're talking about here. He ain't asking me to even fix it. He's just asking me to sympathize and understand, and try to figure out how we're dealing with this and be a partner with it. I don't think that's too much to ask, to be honest with you, hearing him talk like that, you know?
Yeah. And so I wanted to hasten to say this as part of the conversation as well. You know, when I spend time in Milwaukee, I always enjoy the fellowship and, you know, family. But that is a part of town in which my dad will often tell me, don't stand on the porch. Like there's people like to drive around and shoot people here in this part of town. And so, I mean, it's a very real sense. And I was hoping that you'd be able to go just so you could visually see, you know, in my eyes and through your eyes as well, what these kind of communities look like. Not bad people. There's not people who, you know, there's just circumstances that people find themselves in. Well, then we dial back the question and we ask, well, why are these communities the way that they are? And I think you can make this case, maybe demographically, impoverished communities, whether they be Native American communities and some of the resident struggles that they've had with alcoholism and just a litany of family-related issues and breakdown of the family, as well as poor white communities where there's family breakdown, where there's rampant drug abuse. I think, you know, heroin, and some of the other things that you would even deal with in a small community, methamphetamines. Any breakdown in that family structure happens by in part with some of the socioeconomic factors that are at play in those communities. And if you look at African Americans, and if, you know, people have calculated the number, it changes, you know, depending on how you do the research, but billions of dollars that's extracted from the African American community as a result of slavery, money that is earned for white communities and white landowners and so on and so forth, that is not then credited to any earning potential or even land ownership in the Black community. So you look at that disparity that takes place there. And then through the Great Migration, as people under Jim Crow laws and KKK enforcement in the South begin to matriculate to some of these northern communities, and then they face redlining within these particular places where it doesn't matter what your economic status is and how well you're doing. If you're Black, you cannot buy houses in a certain part of the community. You are redlined. You are not allowed to buy homes in that area. And so you're relegated to a place where there's poverty, low income, and a lot of these traumatic situations that are talked about here. Well, that obviously was a racist policy. And there have been many things. Pastor Aaron talked about the fact that white flight and what that looks like in a community that is changing, and that demographic that is then beginning to change, where white families begin to say, we're not comfortable here. And when we're not the majority here, we're going to go elsewhere, and which generally means we're going to take our dollars elsewhere, and businesses are going to follow suit very soon after that. And so there's some, and I appreciate you saying that, Jason, there's some long-term, long-range issues that need to be understood so that we can get to the part where we can just listen and mourn with the community, not coming in to fix it, not coming in to say this is the solution. But I feel like too many times our response is, hear that, your problem, here, that's the solution, fix it.
And getting us, the majority culture, to understand just the long-term effects of decision making. Just understand. And one of the things I appreciate about Aaron and Pastor Kimbrell is just, look, I just want you to be able to at least relate to what I'm saying. You know, like, hear me. You know, you don't have to fix it. You don't have to come in and solve all of our problems, but just don't shut down when I start talking and I start giving you the world from my lens as I'm watching this unfold. And then or to tell me that my view of how things are unfolding is just completely inaccurate and wrong. You just don't see the world rightly, because I don't see it through white eyes. You know, well, you spend enough time with folks, and there's I'm going to say the biggest disconnect is that many of these folks who are very critical of what we're talking about, I would go, and if I was a betting man, I would contend that many of them do not have substantial relationships with minorities. Real hardline, like they might have I don't know how to say this without being really weird, but this idea of I have a token Black friend. Do you remember when I sent you a text a couple of years ago? I was reading through. You gave me a book list of all these books to read on racism in the church. And I remember I sent you a text and I asked you, have I ever made you feel like you were my token black friend? You remember that?
Yes, I do remember that.
Right? Because I was reading through this stuff.
I have a token black friend pin now as a result of that. Oh, Jason is frozen up. Check your internet connection there. Get yourself, at least he's frozen with a smile on his face. Isn't that a great smile? See how excited he is over there? I appreciate that smile. You know what? That's just gonna be the Jason pose from now on. He's animated, he's excited.
Yeah, I know he's and I was like, I was there we go. Am I back on now?
Yeah, you were frozen in a smile. It was good.
No, I remember reading that stuff. I mean, I was reading all through this, and I came to this idea that, Mando, if I ever treated Erskine like he was my token black friend, so I can tell the world, hey, look, I understand their plight. I got a black friend. Look, see, he's right here, right? He's my black guy. So now I've got this connection to the black. So
I'm
community.
Definitely not racist because look,
right. That's right. I'm not racist because I have this black guy. He's on my phone. So hey, look, I got pictures to prove it. And so I would remember like just coming like, man, have I ever made Erskine feel that way? Like, if I did, I was sorry. Like, I was like, man, I got to text this brother real quick and ask him if I've ever done that. And one of the conclusions I've drawn is even my own self was that when I've had discussions with people about this issue, particularly white people, and I would ask, hey, how many friends do you have that are minority? And I would maybe get what I would call it either none, zero, or I would get a token type person, because I'd ask questions. So you spend a lot of time in their house? Do you engage them? Are you over in their? Do you know their family? Do you know their extended family? Do you engage them in other places? I mean, what's this relationship like? And oftentimes I find it's distant. It's a kind of I don't know. So the biggest disconnect to me then, as I'm walking through this, is there's just not enough of a relationship established between these communities for people to truly empathize. They can argue with you. They can tell you how CRT is wrong, and they can tell all these things. But man, when you're face to face with somebody and you're having to listen to them, and not just once, not just one conversation, but over years of having this conversation, that changes things to me. And that's what the gospel's meant to do, right? I mean, it's meant to take all these people who have nothing in common, or maybe have a lot of problems with each other, and unite them under Jesus Christ. And so one of the things I appreciate about Pastor Kimmel's remarks was he asked me to sympathize and empathize with what's going on. And the only way you do that is not just an interview, not just a quick hit, but long-term relationships with the community. I'm at your house, you're in my house. I'm in Milwaukee with you. You're in Pewaukee, where my family is, with me.
Yeah.
And we're doing life together. And I just don't see enough of that happening to make the real impact that the gospel can make. If the church can do that, truly start to live with each other. This is the black and the white. I mean, it's going to take both of us to really live together. I think that's going to turn the world upside down, in my opinion.
I think you've identified something. This week I'm part of the Justice Circle in Nashville. I think I'm kind of newly elected as one of the co-directors of the Justice Circle. There's 3 of us now that have sort of risen to the leadership level at the Justice Circle. And we were listening to a commentary in one of our meetings this last week from a lady who does tours in South Carolina of a plantation. And I can get all the names and that later, but she was just sharing the experience that she has as she takes groups through this plantation, and she gives it from the vantage point of what the slaves would have experienced. Now, she gives as her caveat, this is not one of those feel-good tours where, you come away from it thinking, oh, that was great. Man, slaves had it good, man. 3 hots in a cot. This is not that experience. And she kind of shares some of the raw, unvarnished life in perspective of some of these slaves as they were dealing with things. And one of the things that calls me to think of the many things that it calls me to think of, and just deep, I'm still learning things about what has happened to our forefathers and our ancestors here in America that just calls brokenheartedness and lament on my part. And I'm Black. But there is this sort of thing that also develops in my mind, and I want to deal with it at a later point, but is this term Uncle Tom that sort of comes out, where you have certain Black people that view other Black people, if they don't toe the quote unquote party line, as being an Uncle Tom, and like, oh, you're just agreeing with white people, and you're just, because it's good for you over there and it's not good for us over here. And so there's that narrative that's out there. And I watched Larry Elder's documentary. I don't know if you've been able to see that, Uncle Tom. But there is sort of this narrative on both sides, where I think there are some Black people who benefit from their correspondence with rich, elite white people who would disavow any of these conversations, primarily because they don't have the relationship with African-American communities because of their status or because of their financial. I mean, they've moved out of the hood and they live in another very nice place. And so they don't have to associate with crime, poverty, and which I'm not saying that they need to have to do that. I'm just simply saying, as you talk about the fact that there's a lack of relationship, that can also be a lack of relationship with other Black people,
right?
That causes this discontinuity and this kind of this introspective. And I've also, I think, seen some of that in the majority culture, when there's people who are white who then begin to bring these issues up and say, you know what, we're responsible for carrying the bulk of this conversation because we've created some of these systems and we've created some of these contexts that make it difficult for African Americans, and we need to be very vocal about it, and we need to be very present at Black Lives Matter rallies, and we need to be very present on social media. And there's other, I believe, and I could be wrong about this, but I feel like there's other majority culture white people who look at that and say, no, you should stay in the camp here and not break outside the camp. And we kind of view you now with a certain sense of distrust. You're kind of our Uncle Tom, so to speak, if I could. That we don't like now, because you're speaking about these issues, and they caricature them as the woke people who are out there. Oh, another woke white person that's out there, and it becomes a pretty pejorative term. Have you seen that yourself?
Oh yeah. Well, look, I'm in the middle. I'm in that kind of fray, right? Because I'm a very conservative minded, I guess, politically. Biblically, I am inerrant, fully sufficient, Word of God, Bible preaching, Christ exalting. And you would think that I'm a Trump card carrying type conservative. I live in a community that would probably toe that line, but I'm not. And so I've stepped outside a little bit. And here though I don't endorse critical race theory, and I don't think it's as helpful as it could be. Kevin Jones, in particular, who's one of my professors, has really helped me to understand how to redeem, receive, and reject certain things, and how to have a conversation that I can begin to engage CRT a little better, and actually listen to what people have real problems with. Okay, and then I've had conversations. People. I do know some people watch them and they put me in this category of I'm not all to the right, so therefore I'm left. And then, but I'm now way to the left, so therefore I'm right. And so on the white side, I could be labeled the Uncle Tom for departing from the conservative, typical Republican-minded type person. And on the left side, I'm not as woke as I could be. It's a weird place to be. I don't have a home when it comes to a lot. Matter of fact, I feel like I'm like a foster child most of the time.
Yeah.
So because I can't.
Hey, welcome to the party. That's why we're on this show together. We both here have no lasting city.
I don't mean to make anybody mad. I don't mean to engage people in a way, but I'm trying to think critically about a very important issue. I'm trying to think biblically about something very important. And I don't want to waste my life on theories and ideas. I actually want to make some ground for the kingdom of God. And that means you got to do some hard things. And that means I got to be quiet sometimes. I got to listen. That means I got to engage people I don't always agree with, but at the same time, they're hurting. And I got to hear what they have to say. I got to do things like what Pastor Aaron has called me to do. And he says, look, we both see something wrong. We both got to try to address this. Well, that takes time. It takes effort. It takes a lot of humility, and it takes opportunity, and it takes intention. And when you start playing by those rules, well, man, it's funny how the camp starts to divide and go other places. And I won't ever run a mega church. I won't ever grab the masses doing life this way. So be it, I guess.
But it's real. Yeah, but it's real.
But I sleep just fine at night. I have my integrity. I maintain my ethic. I do believe I'm biblical. I'm not arguing or doing something outside the lines of what I believe the Bible teaches me to live. And I can sit there and disagree with evil and unrighteous things, but at the same time still try to engage sinners and lost people in the gospel. And so I don't think I'm violating the kingdom of God, but it's just funny how your camp just kind of goes weird when you don't tell the line.
Sure.
And so is there such thing as a white Uncle Tom? Well, yeah, sure there is. If you understand what an Uncle Tom is.
Yeah. And just going kind of back to the black perspective again, we've called out some names on this show, and I don't want to call you out like, hey, look, your name is out there, like call out culture. But Larry Elder, if you're listening, if you're out there, Larry Elder, testing, Larry Elder, I have mentioned your name on this show, and you're more than welcome to come on this show. I have seen you at numerous NRB conferences before, National Religious Broadcasters conventions, and have wanted to get on your show at some point. I don't know that we would agree upon a lot of things that you talk about on your show, and your documentary was well done, although I think you missed some dramatic things on that. Candace Owen, also, I've mentioned your name a number of times, and I would invite you to be on. Candace Owen, you're here in Nashville. So you're welcome to come on the show as well. And again, we will be very kind to you, but I would like to hear from the perspective, because as a African-American, I myself am an entrepreneur. Music is the business that I do, and spiritual music related to a ministry that allows me to share the gospel, sort of a musicianary type to speak. But I could become very popular and very wealthy if I would have supported Donald Trump, and if I would have made that a mainstay of what I was doing in my music and career, written songs related to Donald Trump and that whole thing. If I would take the conservative party line, that would be so beneficial for me, because it would have opened up doors for me to be able to travel. I was already introduced in various circles with people who have millions of dollars, and that would have supported my family quite well. And so I have seen that kind of thing take place. I'm curious, Larry Elder, Candace Owen, folks that are in that ilk, if there's a draw or a tendency for you to continue to toe that party line because it's beneficial financially for you. And I'm not trying to say that you're immoral or anything. I'm curious, like behind the scenes, like what goes through your mind? Because I don't think you go to Milwaukee in the inner city and hang out very often. I don't think you walk those streets in Chicago and some of the places where I've been in Lawndale, where literally I'm having a conversation with people and police are chasing somebody down the street who snatched a purse. Like, I don't know if you hang out. Maybe you do. Correct me if I'm wrong. But is there a sense in which your elite level educationally and financially has afforded you the opportunity to hang out with a crowd of people who will endorse you, and they will endorse the things that you say so long as you keep the party line, which is very conservative? I'm curious. Come on the show.
Well, that's the same criticism that's kind of being forged against the Black Lives Matter ladies, right, who are buying those properties out in California.
Mm-hmm.
They're almost disconnecting themselves from the movement. I mean, that money thing, man, that money and power thing. Just maybe that's why we are. Maybe we're just so broke. It don't matter. We relate to the we're just broke as you are.
Yeah, exactly.
I have a funny thing about that. When I was in 9th grade, I was going to North Chicago High School. I mean, it was ghetto. It was straight up straight up ghetto. And I was definitely the minority in that school. I'm sitting outside, and I'm waiting for my dad to come pick me up, and I'm doing my homework, and I just got done with football practice, and this black kid comes up, and he pulls a gun on me, and he's going to rob me. Now I know a fact. He's coming up at me like, look at this white guy sitting on this bench, and he's stupid, right? And he pulls this gun out to rob me, and I remember looking at him saying, "Look, I'm as broke as you are."
Your stereotype was misinformed.
The wrong dude. Like, look where I'm going to school, man. I'm just as broke as you are. And he looked at me for a pause for a second, and I think for like a split second, we're on the same level. Like, he's like, dang. Yeah, like,
I'm robbing this broke dude over here.
I'm robbing this, like I know you think I'm white and I got all this money, but I'm as broke as you are, man. I ain't got no money. And he like punched me and walked away. I'm like, all right. Yeah. I look back and just kind of chuckle because I'm like, you just make this you make this assumption, or maybe he didn't discriminate. Had it been a black guy there, he's like, I'm gonna rob you too. I didn't have the right shoes. I didn't have all that. There's nothing of mine he could take that would have been any more valuable than what he already had. I had nothing. Yeah. I had nothing. My clothes weren't that great. My shoes weren't that great. My jacket I was wearing it wouldn't have fit him. I mean, there was nothing. There was nothing I had. So he was discouraged, and that's just you live in the city, you live in that stuff, and you just gotta learn. I think when you separate out of it and you maybe take the path that Candace Owens and those guys have gotten the opportunity to make some money and get out of it. I wouldn't say, yeah, man, just go back and live in the hood for the hood's sake.
No.
I think you need to go back. One of the things I would like to see happen is to take some of that success and, I don't know, you go back and I don't know how to put it.
You're about to give my way forward. I was about to give this as my way forward. So you say your thing, and then I'm going to say my thing related to that.
I'm thinking like one of the things I would love to see these NBA players do and these football players do is they leave their community and they take their parents out of their community and they put them in another community, and then they'll come back and they'll build a rec center or something, and they'll funnel money into that rec center. Great. Okay. That's not a bad thing. I think what would be cool is to have that community watch these men raise their kids, handle their wife, manage their money, manage their success, do things, and just come back and live and restore the community, provide not just a community center, but just a place of how do we make much of our community? How do we come back and do it? I would love to see the LeBron James of the world take that approach and spend time mentoring these young. They would listen to him. I mean, they would flock like by the thousands to hear what he has to say and watch.
Well, LeBron James might not be the example that you're talking about since he built the school.
right. But yeah, but you get my point though, right? Like,
yeah.
Come back instead of just taking everybody out of the community. Again, taking those resources, and I'll plan a rec center so I can come back and do some things, but live there and show, hey, look, there's a better way. There's a better way of doing things, and staying married and raising your kids and investing in your community and coming together united. That I just think there's a lot of leaders there. There's a lot of good things there. But you get that money and you get that power. And
well, I hasten to say that there are a lot of ex-NBA players and ex-football players and successful businessmen who do those kind of things. I don't want to make it seem like, or I don't want it to hear it be said that they don't do those kind of things. There's a lot of revitalization that has taken place as a result. I know even Lecrae has gone into some neighborhoods and he's bought houses and tried to secure loans for people and give housing, adequate housing for people. And so that's not lost. I just think that, again, if you want to blame somebody, the boogeyman of the media doesn't cover those kind of stories as adequately as I believe they should be covered, and the players who are doing those kind of things. Is there like a campaign rally or something going outside? What in the world? But anyway, yeah, you're right on it. There's there more you wanted to say there?
Well, I just know from my own experience, like I live in a rural town. This is where God's called me. We pray all the time about what is God calling us to do, and he reaffirms it here. But even inside of our community, where we began to reach out to the destitute, to drug infestation, really broken, families, and invest in your life. They away from all that and not engage it, And I'm finding that the more we engage it, the more we talk about it, the more we start to have a relationship with these kids and these families, and we begin to understand their thought process, their logic, their reasoning, their desires, their struggles, and we begin to pray with them and find gospel solutions to things. One, it's going to take a lot of time. Two, it's going to take a lot of energy. Three, it's going to take 30, 40 years of living here in their community, like in there with them, doing life with them to help things change. And I'm just realizing the more we engage that community and the more that we try to spend a lot of time talking and eating together and taking people to soccer games and engaging families, it just takes so much time and energy that you can't do that from a distance. Like we have to do that in-house, in community.
Yeah.
Right? I can't live somewhere else and then come into Litchfield and say, okay, look, I'll help you guys for a little while, but then we'll go back to my place way outside of here. It's just not as effective.
You've gotten extremely personal because now you're messing with people's housing, and the American dream is once we get money, bro, we build that bigger house and we go to that better place and we get some better things. And I'm not so sure that the American dream is not killing this part of the process of us saying, you know what, now that we have more resources, let's invest more resources in other people. Sometimes people whom we might view as maybe disagreeing with certain things in their lifestyle, disagreeing with certain things that, their education, their background. And that gets extremely difficult for people to have to like make those kind of choices. But, I've talked with Kelly before, and I actually was having this conversation back when we lived in Texas of saying, why don't we move out of the parsonage and move into some of these communities where we drive the church van and pick up some of these kids? Our rent would be cheaper. We would know everybody around us. Everybody would go to church here because we already pick up half the kids for church on Wednesday anyway. And we would have a community. We would have a church within a community that is now funneling people into a church, another church. And so I think there's more of that discussion. Ron Doltzler, in a ministry that I've visited in Omaha, Nebraska, in his book, From the Seats to the Streets, they have embodied that philosophy. They have built barbershops. They have built cosmetology schools, educational programs, food pantries, after-school programs, community sports leagues, and a church in a community because they intend to do that. And they've populated the former HUD housing with their staff and personnel who consider themselves to be missionaries living on assignment from God. And their thing is to live in the community and to do life with people in the most organic sense of the word. And I think you are absolutely on it. And, we've been renting our place in Nashville for the last 8 years. The housing prices, place where we live is just, it's incredible. There's no possible way financially we should be able to live where it is that we live, but it's God's blessing. Yet at the same time, I know if the landlord calls tomorrow and says, hey, I'm going to sell the house for $400,000, which you could probably get easily in the community we're in, that's cool. I would honestly entertain the conversation of let's just move right about 2 miles down the road where there's some really low income housing that's there and see what kind of difference we can make in that community.
That's the thing, man. I think that's the way forward for the church. You got to get away from this crazy, massive mega church, $50 million budget type ministry, and you've got to move more grassroots into the community, engage these folks, live there, live like them, be like Hudson Taylor did.
Yeah.
Missions. He has really embraced Chinese culture, from his hair to his feet to what he ate to what he wore to where he lived. And the Westerners didn't care for him as much, but the Chinese loved him. The
Absolutely.
Chinese loved him because he just gave himself to them. And I think we're at a place in America that this could be that's the solution. Get back to the roots, get back to the people, and get back to where the gospel really has the most success, and that's always on the periphery of society, always.
Yep. Wow. That, as I'm thinking about that as a house church planter and house church catalyst, just how amazingly fast our church would flourish. We already have wonderful relationships on the street that we live on.
Yeah.
And I think that is that sort of grassroots approach where you're taking cookies over to people because it's May the 4th, or you're, bottles of water, or they see you have a yard sale, or they come up and talk to you during those kind of things, and you go swim in their pool in the summertime, and you go hang out with them, and they come hang out with you, and they see you barbecuing and playing games. I mean, that's the things that I think a lot of churches try to invent some ministries so the church can do that. But really, the people of God doing those kind of things and letting people see how authentic and real your faith is gets us back into this conversation where now life is pressed together, and we then begin to see how we do life together and how we move forward together. And that would be, excuse me, my way forward today.
Yeah. Today.
All right. I got to do a sound effect here because this was a good show.
Yeah, man.
The dolphin. Not a lot of interaction today, but I would probably say that this is probably one of the best episodes that we've had. Jason, can we go one more week here with just a couple of sound bites that I think will give us a lot to talk about? Maybe do the show next week. And then I think we'll be coming up on some of the finale shows of this, and maybe invite some of the longtime guests and supporters to come on the show. We'll have to give them some rules. Like maybe you get a 30-second sound bite. You're in this thing and then you're out, because all of our friends and all the people that we know that are a part of this show, they're big talkers.
Yeah.
So we wouldn't even get a word in edgewise if everybody came on the show. But we do want to get people on the show, and we do want to have some folks that we treasure and cherish come on the show and give verbal, facial confirmation of what it is that we're talking about, the variety of people who watch the show. I think that'd be a good finale for us.
Yeah. That'd be cool. I'd love it.
So I need to get on the road here and get back to Nashville. If you haven't already known this, you probably should know that Mother's Day is tomorrow. Respond appropriately and accordingly. I am going to be preaching a message called A Woman's Tale from Titus 2.
All right. I'm going a little bit out of my wheelhouse. I'm going a little topical, and I'm looking at how God uses motherhood to illustrate his care and concern for his people.
That's good.
Yeah. So
I love it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's good. Gave me a lot of opportunity to contemplate how God uses women and mothers in church to teach people about his characters and his care and his commitment to us, that kind of alliteration type.
Yep. So I'll give my sermon brief on Marco Polo here in just a little bit, and then tomorrow I'll preach it. And, just enjoying that life.
Good.
So, brother, you continue on. Love you.
Yeah, you too.
It's been a great show. Tell the family we said hello. It's good to see some of the family members popping up in there and hearing some background noise of the life of the Plumbers. When are you guys coming to visit us?
Probably sooner than later. I got some time coming up, so we got to talk about Justin and Jazzy at camp at some point. Maybe we can work something out after camp.
Yeah, we'll talk about it.
All right.
All right, my friend. Let me close down the show.
Okay.
Way forward. Coming to get you.